The white-haired man stood at the ticket counter with 2 seats already selected in his Mind Center orchestra, row 8, perfect sightlines, and realized with a sharp, unfamiliar pang that the woman he'd been watching for 3 months had likely never sat in any of them. Iskander Petran had lived for nearly 800 years, and in all that time, nothing had struck him quite like the sight of Sophia Zimmerman pushing her cleaning cart through the opera house at 2 in the morning, pausing in the center aisle to look up at the chandelier with an expression of such quiet longing it had stopped him mid-step. He'd been leaving through a side entrance that night, collar turned up against the spring rain, when he'd heard the soft squeak of wheels on marble, and turned back. She'd stood there in her gray uniform, mop in hand, staring at the empty stage as though it held every dream she'd ever kept to herself. That had been April. Now it was July, and he'd learned her schedule, her route through the building, the way she always saved the main auditorium for last so she could linger. He'd learned she brought her dinner in a blue lunchbox and ate it sitting on the back stairs. He'd learned she was 23, that she'd worked here since she was 19, and that in 4 years of scrubbing these floors she had never once seen a performance. The ticket seller, a nervous human woman who'd worked here long enough to recognize what Iskander was, even if she didn't know his name, cleared her throat. "Sir, which performance?" "La Traviata," he said. "Saturday, 8 o'clock. 2 tickets, row 8, center orchestra." She printed them without another word, though her hands shook slightly as she slid the envelope across the counter. Iskander took it and left a tip that would cover her rent for the month, then walked out into the summer evening. The city sprawled around him, all glass and steel and electric light, but beneath it ran the old pathways, the vampire realm that existed in the spaces humans didn't look. His kingdom, technically, though the title sat more heavily on him with each passing year. Vampire King of the Eastern Territories. It had meant something once, when his voice could fill a hall or silence a room with a single word, when he could sing. He touched his throat, a habit he'd developed over the past year, as the curse. The fading, they called it, had begun to take hold. His voice still worked for speaking, though it had lost its resonance, the particular timbre that had once made humans weep and vampires kneel. Singing was worse. The notes cracked now, failed him halfway through a phrase. He, who had once performed on this very stage, centuries ago when the opera house had been new, and humans had whispered that the white-haired tenor must be an angel. Iskander walked the 12 blocks to his residence, a converted mansion that sat above one of the old access points to the vampire realm. Inside, his second-in-command was waiting. Lucian was younger by several centuries, though still ancient by human standards, with the characteristic white hair and pale skin of their kind. He looked up from the stack of correspondence he'd been reviewing. "The council wants another meeting." "Of course they do." "They're concerned," Lucian chose his words carefully. "About the fading, about whether you can still lead if you can't command a room," Iskander shrugged out of his jacket. "I'm aware of their concerns." "Iskander," Lucian stood. "They're not wrong to worry. The voice has always been part of how our kings rule, its tradition, its power. Then perhaps tradition needs to evolve." But even as he said it, Iskander felt the weight of the truth. Vampire culture was built on old laws, older rituals. A king who couldn't speak with authority, who couldn't enforce his will through the ancient resonance that was part of their nature, that king was vulnerable. And a vulnerable king didn't last long. He thought of Sophia again, the way she'd looked at that stage. The tickets were tucked in his inner pocket, 2 small rectangles of cardboard that felt, absurdly, like the most important thing he'd done in decades. "I'm taking someone to the opera on Saturday," he said. Lucian blinked. "You're what?" "You heard me. Iskander, you haven't been to a performance in over a year. You can barely stand to walk past the theater district." "I'm not going for me." He pulled out the tickets, set them on the desk between them. "I'm going for her." "Her?" Lucian picked up the tickets, examined them. "Who is she?" "Someone who deserves to see La Traviata from the orchestra section instead of from behind a mop." Understanding dawned slowly across Lucian's face. "The cleaning woman? The one you've been, Iskander? Are you serious?" "Completely. You've been watching her for months and haven't said a word, and now you're just going to hand her opera tickets?" "I'm going to ask her properly," Iskander said. "Tomorrow night." Lucian sat back down, looking stunned. The council will lose their minds. The council can wait. Iskander took the tickets back, slid them carefully into his pocket. This is more important. The next evening, Iskander arrived at the opera house at 1:30 in the morning. He'd timed it carefully. Sophia would be starting on the upper floors now, working her way down. He had perhaps an hour before she reached the main auditorium. He let himself in through the side entrance, the one he'd used for centuries, long before there were electronic locks and security cameras. The night guard, another human who'd learned not to ask questions about pale visitors after hours, nodded to him and went back to his crossword puzzle. The opera house at night was a different creature than during performances, silent, expectant, full of shadows that held memory. Iskander had sung here in 1891 when the building was newly opened and gas lamps still lit the boxes. He'd performed Rossini and Mozart, had received standing ovations from crowds who had no idea they were applauding one of the creatures they feared in folk tales. Then his voice had been flawless. He pushed the memory aside and climbed the stairs to the third floor, where he could hear the distant sound of a vacuum cleaner. He found her in the east corridor, working her way methodically along the carpeted hallway, earbuds in. She hadn't noticed him yet. Iskander waited until she turned off the vacuum to move forward. She saw him then, and startled, pulling out her earbuds. "I'm sorry," she said immediately. "I didn't know anyone was here. Do you work here?" Up close, she was even lovelier than he'd realized. Dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, warm brown eyes, a dusting of freckles across her nose. She looked tired, she always looked tired, but there was something unbreakable in the set of her shoulders. "Not exactly," Iskander said. "I'm a patron. I hope I didn't frighten you." "No, it's okay. I'm used to people wandering around after performances, but we're dark this week for maintenance." She glanced at her watch. "It's pretty late. I came looking for you, actually." That surprised her. "For me? Your name is Sophia, isn't it? Sophia Zimmerman?" She took a small step back, suddenly wary. "How do you know my name?" "I've seen you here, working. I asked the house manager." He held up his hands, showing he meant no harm. "I have something to ask you, and I wanted to do it in person rather than leaving a note." "Ask me what?" Iskander drew out the tickets. "La Traviata is playing this Saturday. These are for the 8 o'clock performance. I was hoping you'd accompany me." Sophia stared at the tickets, then at him, then back at the tickets. "I don't understand." "It's not complicated. I have 2 tickets. I'd like you to be my guest. But I don't know you." "My name is Iskander Petran. I've been a patron of this opera house for a very long time, and I've noticed that you seem to love it here." Something shifted in her expression. "You've been watching me." "I've seen you," he corrected gently. "Looking at the stage, standing in the aisles. You work here, but you've never seen a performance, have you?" She crossed her arms. "How do you know that? Am I wrong?" A long pause. Then, quietly, "No, I've never been able to afford it, and even if I could, I work nights. I'm usually here when the shows are running." "Not this Saturday. You have the weekend off. I checked the schedule." He held out the tickets again. "So come with me. Let me show you what you've been missing." "Why?" The question was direct, almost challenging. "Why would you do this for a stranger?" "Because you looked at that empty stage like it held the answer to everything. Because I've lived 8 centuries and never seen anyone appreciate beauty the way you do without ever possessing it. Because I'm losing the thing I loved most, and you've never had it, and maybe giving you this one perfect evening will mean something." But he couldn't say any of that. Not yet. "Because everyone should see La Traviata at least once," he said instead, "and because I think you'd appreciate it more than most people who can afford these seats." Sophia looked at him for a long moment. He could see her thinking, weighing the strangeness of the offer against the clear desire in her eyes. "Want one." "Okay," she said. "Yes, I'll go." Relief flooded through him. "Excellent. The performance starts at 8. Should I meet you here, or—" "There's a coffee shop on 5th and Morrison. Do you know it?" "I'll find it." 7:30, she said. "And Mr. Petran? Thank you, really." He smiled. "Call me Iskander. And you're welcome." He left her there in the corridor, and as he descended the stairs, he heard the vacuum cleaner start up again. But when he glanced back, she was standing still, holding her earbuds, staring at nothing with a look of dazed wonder on her face. The council meeting happened Friday afternoon in the old chamber beneath the city. Iskander attended because refusing would only make things worse, but he said as little as possible. Severin, the eldest after Iskander himself, led the complaints. Your voice continues to fail. We all hear it. The question is what you intend to do about it. I'm managing it, Iskander said. Managing it how? You can barely address the court without strain. How do you expect to maintain order, to enforce the laws? The same way I've done for the past 300 years, with intelligence and strategy. The voice is not a minor thing. This from Vivian, who ruled the Southern Territories. It's how we've governed since the beginning. It's part of what makes a king. Then perhaps our understanding of kingship is too narrow. The room erupted in arguments. Iskander let them talk, conserving his energy. Eventually, they'd tire themselves out. Lucian, sitting at his right hand, leaned over. You're going to have to give them something. I'm aware. What will you do? Find another way to lead. Iskander stood, cutting off the debate. When he spoke, his voice was soft, but everyone stilled to hear it a small mercy that they still respected him enough to listen. I understand your concerns. I share them. But I've ruled these territories for 3 centuries, and I won't abandon them or you now. Give me time. How much time? Severin asked. As much as I need. It wasn't a satisfactory answer, and they all knew it, but it was all he had. Saturday arrived wrapped in golden sunshine that sent Iskander into the windowless lower levels of his home until evening. He spent the afternoon selecting what to wear: a formal suit, black, with a silver waistcoat that matched his hair. Classic. Appropriate for the opera. Lucian knocked once before entering. You're really doing this? I really am. The court is going to talk. Let them. Iskander. Lucian hesitated. What is she to you? That was the question, wasn't it? Iskander nodded his tie, considering. I don't know yet. Someone worth knowing, I think. You've fallen for a human cleaning woman. I've fallen for a woman who finds beauty in a place she can't access and still shows up every night to be near it. The rest is just details. Lucian shook his head, but he was smiling slightly. Good luck. Thank you. The coffee shop on 5th and Morrison was a small place, warm and smelling of espresso and cinnamon. Sophia was already there when Iskander arrived at 7:25, sitting at a corner table in a dark blue dress that looked new. She'd done something different with her hair, left it down in soft waves, and she wore minimal makeup, but her eyes were bright with anticipation. She saw him and smiled, nervous but genuine. You came, she said as he approached. Did you think I wouldn't? I wasn't sure this was real, she admitted. Felt like maybe I'd dreamed it. He sat across from her. It's real. You look lovely. She blushed. Thank you. I wasn't sure what to wear to the opera. You're perfect. And she was. Not because of the dress, but because of the way she couldn't quite sit still, the excitement radiating from her like heat. Have you eaten? I was too nervous. We'll get something after. There's a place near the theater. Okay, she picked up her purse, a small clutch that also looked new. I'm ready if you are. They walked the 6 blocks to the opera house through the summer evening. The sun had set, leaving the sky streaked with purple and orange. Sophia kept glancing at him when she thought he wasn't looking. Finally, she asked, Can I ask you something? Of course. Why me? I mean, really, you could take anyone to the opera. Iskander considered his answer carefully. The truth was complicated, that he was drawn to her in ways he didn't fully understand, that watching her had become the brightest part of his evenings, that he was dying slowly, and she made him want to fight it. But simplicity was sometimes its own honesty. Because you love this place, he said, and because I wanted your first time to be perfect. She looked away, but he caught the shine in her eyes. That's possibly the nicest thing anyone's ever said to me. Then people haven't been paying attention. The opera house glittered ahead of them, all lit up for the evening performance. Sophia's steps slowed as they approached, taking it in. I've only ever seen it like this from the outside. Not anymore. He offered his arm, and after a moment's hesitation, she took it. Inside, the lobby was crowded with patrons in evening wear. Sophia pressed closer to him, suddenly self-conscious, but Iskander guided her through the crowd with easy confidence. He collected their programs, declined champagne, another quirk of vampirism, the inability to consume anything but blood, and led her toward the orchestra entrance. "Wait," she said, stopping. "These are orchestra seats?" "Center orchestra, best in the house." "Iskander, these must have cost—" "Don't worry about the cost. Tonight isn't about money." The usher checked their tickets and led them down the aisle. Sophia's grip on his arm tightened as they descended, as the stage came into view and the massive chandelier sparkled overhead. When they reached row 8, she stood for a moment before sitting, just staring. "It's different from here," she whispered. "Yes. I've looked at this stage 1,000 times, but I've never—" She sat slowly, running her hand along the armrest. "Thank you. Seriously. Thank you." He took the seat beside her. "The performance hasn't even started yet." "I don't care. This is already perfect." The house lights dimmed then, and the audience settled. Sophia opened her program, reading through it quickly. When the conductor appeared, she leaned forward slightly. Attention absolute. The overture began. Iskander had heard La Traviata more times than he could count. He'd seen it performed in a dozen cities, had known Verdi's music when it was new and scandalous. But watching Sophia experience it for the first time gave it a freshness he'd forgotten was possible. She reacted to everything, the staging, the costumes, the voices. When Violetta sang Sempre Libera, Sophia's eyes shone. During the Act 2 confrontation between Violetta and Germont, tears slipped down her cheeks. Iskander found himself watching her more than the stage, cataloging every expression. This was what he'd wanted to see her have this, to give her something beautiful. But he hadn't expected how much her joy would affect him, how it would settle into his chest like warmth, like hope. At intermission, she turned to him with a dazed smile. "This is incredible." "You're enjoying it?" "Enjoying it? Iskander, She shook her head, laughing. "I don't have words. The music is so beautiful it hurts. I know the feeling. Have you seen this before?" "A few times." "You must think I'm ridiculous getting emotional over something you've probably seen dozens of times." "No," he said quietly. "I think you're perfect." She blushed again, looked away. "Do you want to get a drink or something? I don't know what people do at intermission." "We can stay here if you prefer. Sometimes the best part is just sitting with it." "Yeah," she settled back in her seat. "Yeah, let's do that." They sat in comfortable silence while the crowd milled around them. Sophia read through the program again, absorbing every detail. Iskander watched the stagehands adjust the set for Act 3, but his awareness centered on the woman beside him. "Can I ask you something now?" he said. She looked up. "Sure. How did you end up working here?" "At the Opera House?" She folded the program carefully. "I needed a job 4 years ago. I'd just aged out of foster care and was trying to make rent. They were hiring for night cleaning. I figured, why not? At least it would be beautiful, even if I was just scrubbing floors." Foster care. That explained the isolation he'd sensed in her, the independence. "Do you have family in the city?" "No family anywhere, really. It's just me." She said it matter-of-factly, without self-pity. "What about you? Do you have family?" "Not in the traditional sense." He thought of the council, of Lucian. "I have people I'm responsible for. It's complicated." "Sounds lonely?" "Sometimes," he admitted. "Less so recently." She met his eyes, and something passed between them, understanding, recognition. Two solitary people finding unexpected connection. The lights dimmed again, saving him from having to elaborate. Act 3 began with Violetta dying, and Sophia watched with her hand pressed to her mouth. When Alfredo returned, and they sang their final duet, she was openly crying. Iskander pulled a handkerchief from his pocket and offered it silently. She took it with a grateful nod, pressing it to her eyes. The final notes faded. Violetta died. The curtain fell. The audience erupted in applause, but Sophia sat still, clutching the handkerchief, tears still streaming. Iskander waited, giving her time. Finally, she looked at him. "That was the most beautiful thing I've ever experienced. I'm glad I could share it with you. Why didn't you drink anything? At intermission or before the show? Everyone else was having champagne. Sharp, observant. He'd have to be careful." "I don't drink alcohol. Medical condition." "Oh, sorry." Nothing to apologize for. He stood, offering his hand. Come on, let's get out of here before the crowd. She took his hand, let him pull her up. They made their way up the aisle as the audience continued to applaud the curtain calls. Outside, the summer night had cooled, and Sophia shivered slightly. There's a restaurant 2 blocks over, Iskander said. Nothing fancy, but the food is good. Are you hungry? Starving, actually. The restaurant was small and quiet, the kind of place that stayed open late for the after-theater crowd. They were seated in a corner booth, and Sophia ordered pasta and wine. Iskander requested water and pretended to study the menu before claiming he'd eaten earlier. You're sure? Sophia asked. I feel weird eating if you're not. Please. I'm enjoying watching you enjoy yourself. Her pasta arrived, and she ate with unselfconscious pleasure, still talking about the opera between bites. The way Violetta's voice changed in the 3rd act when she was sick, you could hear the death in it, and the staging when Alfredo threw the money at her. I actually gasped. The soprano was excellent tonight, Iskander agreed. One of the better Violettas I've heard. How many operas have you seen? Hundreds, probably. I've been attending performances for a long time. What's your favorite? He considered. That's difficult. La Bohème, perhaps, or Don Giovanni. But Traviata is special. The music is passionate in a way that feels true. Do you sing? The question was casual, but it landed like a knife between his ribs. I used to, he said carefully. Not anymore. Why not? I lost the ability, illness. It was close enough to the truth. Her expression softened with sympathy. I'm sorry. That must be hard, loving music and not being able to perform it. It is, he paused. But tonight reminded me why I loved it in the first place, so thank you for that. She set down her fork, looking at him with an intensity that made his breath catch. Iskander, can I be honest? Please. I still don't really understand why you did this. The tickets, the dinner. You don't know me. I'd like to. The words came out before he could reconsider them. I'd like to know you, Sophia. Why? Because you're interesting. Because you see beauty in things. Because when I watch you in that opera house, you look like you're exactly where you belong, even though you're there to clean instead of to watch. He leaned forward. Because I'm 800 years old, and I haven't been this interested in someone in decades. The confession slipped out with the last sentence, and he realized his mistake immediately. But Sophia just laughed. 800 years old? What are you, a vampire? He said nothing. Her laughter faded. She stared at him, searching his face. You're serious? Yes. You're actually telling me you're a vampire? I am a vampire, and a very old one. She should have run, should have called him insane, made an excuse, fled. Instead, she sat back, studying him with new attention, the white hair that could have been premature, but wasn't, the pale skin that never flushed, the old-fashioned formality of his speech, the way he'd ordered nothing but water. Prove it, she said. Iskander glanced around the restaurant. It was late enough that only 2 other tables were occupied, both far enough away for privacy. He leaned across the table and opened his mouth slightly, letting his fangs extend just enough for her to see. Sophia's eyes widened. Oh my God, he retracted them. Still want that proof? You're actually... She grabbed her wine, drained half the glass. Okay, vampires are real. You're a vampire. You took me to the opera. Why? Do you want to eat me? No, he said firmly. I feed from volunteers, people who consent. I would never hurt you. But you could. Yes, but I won't. She processed this, turning her wine glass in nervous circles. What do you want from me then? Honestly, I wanted to give you something beautiful. I've been watching you look at that stage for months, and I wanted you to experience it properly. That's all. That's all. Well, he amended, I was hoping we might do this again. Not necessarily the opera, but this. Dinner, conversation, getting to know each other. You want to date me? Yes, if you're willing. Sophia laughed, a little wildly. This is insane. I should be running. I should be calling someone. But you're not. No, she met his eyes. I'm not, and I don't know if that makes me brave or stupid. Brave, Iskander said. Definitely brave. You really are 800 years old? 793 to be precise. And you're, what did you say? You are a king? I am a king, vampire king of the Eastern Territories, though the position is somewhat precarious at the moment. Because of the illness? The one that made you stop singing? Too perceptive by half. Yes. What happens if you can't do whatever vampire kings are supposed to do? The council will replace me, possibly kill me, depending on how threatened they feel. Her hand shot across the table, grabbing his. That's not okay. Can't you fight it? The illness? The touch startled him, the warmth of her skin, the firmness of her grip. I'm trying, but it's a rare condition, and the traditional remedies haven't worked. There has to be something. Perhaps. He turned his hand to clasp hers properly. But that's not what tonight is about. Tonight was about you. Tonight was perfect, she said softly. Vampire king or not, this was the best night of my life. Mine too, he said, and meant it. They sat there in the quiet restaurant, hands linked across the table, while the rest of the city moved on without them. Eventually, Sophia glanced at her watch and winced. It's almost midnight. I should get home. Let me take you. You don't have to. I want to. She lived in a small apartment in a converted building on the east side, 20 minutes by cab. Iskander paid the driver and walked her to the door. Thank you, Sophia said, turning to face him on the steps. For everything. For the opera, for dinner, for telling me the truth, I think. You're welcome, and Sophia. Yeah? Would you have dinner with me again? Next weekend, perhaps? She smiled, and it was like the sun rising. Yes, I'd like that. Good. He hesitated, then leaned down and kissed her cheek gently. Good night. Good night, Iskander. He waited until she was safely inside before turning away. As he walked back toward the main street, he felt lighter than he had in months. The fading still lurked in his throat, still threatened everything he'd built, but for the first time in a long time, he had something to fight for beyond duty. He had her. The following weeks unfolded like a dream. Iskander and Sophia fell into a rhythm of dinners and long walks through the city at night. He showed her the hidden places, the old gardens that bloomed in secret, the bookshops that stayed open until dawn, the jazz clubs where musicians played for love rather than money. She showed him the city through her eyes, pointing out details he'd stopped noticing centuries ago. They talked about everything. She told him about growing up in foster care, about the families she'd stayed with, about learning to be self-sufficient, because depending on others meant disappointment. He told her about the early centuries of his life, about seeing the world change, about the strange loneliness of immortality. She asked about vampire culture, and he explained what he could, the courts and councils, the blood laws, the ancient traditions. She listened with fascination, asking intelligent questions that made him see his own world differently. It sounds lonely, she said one night. They were sitting on a bench in the park, the city lights glittering around them. Being immortal. Watching everyone you care about die. It can be, he admitted. That's why most vampires only form close relationships with other vampires. But you're here with me? Yes. Why? He touched her face, tracing the line of her jaw. Because some things are worth the risk. She leaned into his touch. I'm mortal, Iskander. I'm going to age. I'm going to die. I know. Does that scare you? Terrifies me, he said honestly. But the thought of not having this, not having you, scares me more. She kissed him then, properly, for the first time. It was soft and sweet and tasted like hope. When they pulled apart, she was smiling. I'm falling for you, she whispered. Is that crazy? If it is, then I'm crazy too. But the outside world intruded, as it always did. The council grew more insistent in their demands for a solution to the fading. Iskander's voice continued to weaken, the resonance slipping away like sand through fingers. He could still speak, but the authority was gone. When he tried to command, younger vampires sometimes ignored him. When he addressed the court, he could see the doubt in their eyes. Lucian confronted him on a Thursday night, after another failed council session. This can't continue, Lucian said bluntly. Severin is already positioning himself as your replacement. Vivian is wavering in her support. You need to do something. I'm working on it. Working on what? Spending every night with a human woman while your kingdom falls apart? Iskander turned on him, and even without the voice, there was enough fury in his expression to make Lucian step back. Careful. I'm trying to help you. That woman Sophia, she's all you think about now. And I understand, I do, but she's not going to save you from the council. I don't expect her to. Then what's your plan? I don't have one yet, Iskander admitted. The words tasted like defeat. But I'm not giving her up. Not for the council, not for the throne. I've spent 3 centuries being what they needed. For once, I'm choosing something for myself. Lucian shook his head. They'll kill you. Let them try. But the bravado was hollow, and they both knew it. A king without a voice was a king without power, and in the vampire world, power was everything. The crisis came 2 weeks later at a formal council gathering. Iskander attended because absence would be seen as weakness, but he brought Sophia with him a calculated risk, introducing her to his world. She wore a black dress he'd bought her, simple but elegant, and she held his arm with quiet confidence as they descended into the vampire realm beneath the city. The old passages opened onto a vast chamber carved from stone, lit with candles that had burned for centuries. The council members were already assembled, along with various courtiers and nobles from across the territories. The room fell silent when Iskander entered with Sophia. Severin recovered first. My lord, you bring a guest. This is Sophia Zimmerman, Iskander said. She's under my protection. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Sophia pressed closer to him, but she didn't look away from the sea of white-haired, pale-skinned vampires watching her with varying degrees of interest and hunger. A human, Vivian said, sounding amused. How unexpected. My personal life is not council business, Iskander replied. Everything about you is council business, Severin countered. You're our king. Or have you forgotten? The challenge was clear. Iskander felt Sophia tense beside him, but he squeezed her hand in reassurance. I've forgotten nothing, including the fact that I've ruled these territories successfully for 300 years. Successfully? Severin stepped forward. You can barely speak without strain. Your voice is gone. How do you expect to maintain order when you can't even command a room? I command through action and intelligence, not just voice. That's not how we do things. That's not tradition. Then tradition is flawed. The room erupted. Vampires arguing, some supporting Severin, others defending Iskander out of loyalty, if not conviction. Sophia stood still in the center of the chaos, and Iskander saw her taking it all in the politics, the power plays, the barely concealed threats. Finally, Vivian called for order. Enough. We're not solving this tonight. But Iskander, understand this. The council's patience is not infinite. You need to find a solution to the fading, or we will find a new king. How much time? Iskander asked. A month, maybe less. They left shortly after, climbing back up to the surface world. Sophia didn't speak until they were blocks away from the entrance, standing in the cool night air. They're going to kill you, she said, echoing Lucian's words. Probably. That's not okay. I know. She turned to face him, grabbing both his hands. There has to be a way to fix this. The fading, what causes it? No one knows for certain. It's rare, occurs in very old vampires. Some think it's the soul wearing out. Others say it's the voice consuming itself. What do you think? He considered. I think it started when I stopped caring, when ruling became obligation instead of passion, when I couldn't remember why any of it mattered. And now? Now I remember. Because of you. She shook her head. It's not enough, though. I make you happy, but I can't cure you. Maybe happiness is the cure. Iskander. Sophia, listen to me. He pulled her close. I spent centuries performing, singing, ruling, commanding. I was good at it because I loved it. But somewhere along the way, I lost that love. The voice faded because I had nothing left to say. But these past weeks with you, I've remembered what it feels like to have something worth speaking about, something worth fighting for. You think loving me will bring your voice back? I think it's already starting to. He'd noticed it in small ways, the resonance returning when he spoke to her, the ease of words that had been choking him for months. You make me want to sing again. Tears shone in her eyes. Then sing for me. Here, right now. I don't care if it's perfect. I just want to hear you try. Iskander looked around. They were alone on the street, the city quiet around them. He took a breath, felt the familiar fear rise up. What if he failed? What if the notes cracked? What if— But Sophia was watching him with such faith that he had to try. He started with something simple, an old Italian art song he'd learned centuries ago. The first few notes were rough, uncertain, but then something shifted, some barrier breaking, and the sound smoothed out. Not perfect, not what it had been, but recognizably his voice, recognizably music. He sang the whole piece, while Sophia stood with her hands pressed to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. When he finished, she threw her arms around him. "That was beautiful," she whispered. "You're healing. Because of you." She pulled back enough to look at him. "Then we'll make it work. We'll figure this out together. I'm not losing you to some vampire council because they're stuck in the past." Her fierce determination made him smile. "You're extraordinary, do you know that?" "I'm in love with you," she said, "so I'm biased." "Say that again." "I'm in love with you, Iskander Petran, vampire king, opera lover, man who gave me the most perfect night of my life. I'm completely, stupidly in love with you." He kissed her then, there on the empty street, and felt something settle into place inside him. The fading wasn't gone, he could still feel it lurking in his throat, but it was quieter now, held at bay by this connection, this feeling. "I love you too," he said against her lips. "I have from the moment I saw you looking at that stage." They stood there, holding each other, while the city moved around them, two people who shouldn't have worked mortal and immortal, human and vampire, but somehow did. The next weeks were a balance between joy and dread. Iskander's voice continued to improve, strengthening each time he sang for Sophia. She asked him to sing constantly while they cooked dinner in his kitchen, while they walked through the park, while they lay together in his bed in the hours before dawn. And each time, it got easier. But the council's deadline loomed. A month became 3 weeks, then 2. Severin's faction grew bolder, openly questioning Iskander's authority. There were incidents, younger vampires refusing to follow orders, disputes escalating into violence. The territories were growing unstable. Lucian pulled him aside after another tense meeting. "It's working, the singing. I can hear the difference." "Not enough, though." "No, you'd need to demonstrate it publicly. Prove to the council that you've recovered." "How?" "Sing for them, properly. Show them the voice is back." Iskander considered it. They'd see it as a performance, a trick. "Then make it undeniable. Sing something that requires the full resonance, something that proves you can still command." An idea began to form, dangerous and perfect. "The opera house is going dark for renovations next week, 3 nights completely closed. And I could arrange a private performance, just the council and the court, show them I've recovered." "That could work?" Lucian paused. "Will Sophia be there?" "She has to be. She's the reason it's working." The arrangements came together quickly. Iskander spoke to the opera house director, a human who'd been accepting vampire patronage for years, and secured the building for a night. He hired an orchestra, small but professional. He selected the piece carefully, Nessun Dorma from Turandot. A tenor's aria, powerful and demanding, requiring complete vocal control. When he told Sophia, she looked terrified. "You're going to sing in front of the entire vampire court?" "I'm going to prove to them that I can still rule." "What if something goes wrong?" "Then I'll die, and you'll be free to live your life without worrying about vampire politics." "That's not funny." He took her hands. "Sophia, I need you there. You're the only reason any of this is possible." "I don't understand how I help." "You make me remember why it matters. When I sing for you, it's not about power or politics. It's about sharing something beautiful with someone I love. That's what I lost, that connection to the music. You gave it back to me." She squeezed his hands. "Then I'll be there, front row, cheering you on. Just being there is enough." The night of the performance arrived cold and clear. The opera house stood dark and imposing, closed to the public. Iskander arrived early to run through the piece with the orchestra, testing his voice. It held strong, the resonance clear, but he wouldn't know for certain until the moment arrived. Sophia came in through the back entrance, dressed in the blue dress she'd worn to their first opera. She found him backstage, pacing. "Hey," she said softly. "How are you holding up?" "Terrified." "You're going to be amazing." "You don't know that." "Yes, I do. I've heard you sing, remember? You're extraordinary." He pulled her close, breathing in the scent of her human and warm and alive. If this goes wrong, it won't. But if it does, I need you to know, these past weeks with you have been the best of my very long life. Iskander. Let me finish. Whatever happens tonight, I don't regret any of it. Not meeting you, not falling in love with you, not choosing you over the council's approval. You're worth everything. She kissed him fiercely. You're going to survive this. We both are. And then we're going to have a very long, very happy life together. Got it? He smiled despite his fear. Got it. The council began arriving at 9. Iskander watched from backstage as the vampires filled the orchestra seat, Severin and his faction in the front rows, Vivian and the moderates behind them, Lucian and the loyalists scattered throughout. Perhaps 200 vampires in total, all watching the stage with varying degrees of skepticism. Sophia sat in the center of the third row, the only human in a sea of pale faces and white hair. She looked small but unafraid, her attention fixed on the closed curtain. The orchestra took their places. The conductor glanced back toward the wings, waiting for Iskander's signal. This was it. Prove himself or die. Iskander stepped onto the stage. The vampires fell silent, watching. He could feel their doubt, their anticipation. Severin leaned forward, clearly expecting failure, but Sophia was smiling at him, and that was all that mattered. Iskander nodded to the conductor. The music began the familiar opening strains of Nessun Dorma. He waited for his entrance, feeling the fear rise up and then recede. When the moment came, he opened his mouth and sang. The first note rang out clear and strong, filling the opera house with a resonance that had been missing for too long. He saw the council members react, saw the shock register, but he didn't focus on them. He sang to Sophia, letting the music pour out, letting it be what it was meant to be, not a demonstration of power, but an expression of feeling. The aria built to its climax, the famous final phrase, Vincerò, Vincerò, I will win. The notes soared, pure and powerful, and Iskander held them with everything he had. The orchestra swelled beneath him, and for a moment it was perfect, the music, the moment, the connection between performer and audience. The final note faded. Silence held for a heartbeat. Then Sophia started applauding, and the rest of the council joined in. Not polite recognition, but genuine appreciation. Even Severin was nodding, grudgingly impressed. Iskander bowed and walked off stage. Behind the curtain, his knees nearly buckled with relief. He'd done it. The voice had held. He was going to survive. Lucian found him first, grabbing him in an embrace. That was magnificent. I've never heard you sing better. Thank you. The council will have to accept this. There's no question now you've recovered. Most of me has. Iskander touched his throat. The fading was still there, a whisper in the background, but it was manageable now. Sophia had been right. Love hadn't cured him completely, but it had given him a reason to fight. The council gathered backstage, Severin leading them. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Severin inclined his head in a gesture of respect Iskander hadn't seen from him in months. Well sung, Severin said. I stand corrected. Your voice has clearly returned. It was never truly gone, Iskander replied. I just needed to remember what I was singing for. Vivian smiled knowingly. The human girl? Her name is Sophia. And yes, dangerous, falling in love with a mortal. I've found it's worth the risk. The council members exchanged glances. Finally, Vivian spoke for them all. We accept that you've recovered sufficiently to continue ruling. The challenge to your authority is withdrawn. Relief crashed over him, but Iskander kept his expression neutral. Thank you. I won't disappoint you. See that you don't. They filed out, leaving Iskander alone with Lucian. You did it, Lucian said. You actually did it. I had help. Go find her. She's waiting. Iskander made his way back to the auditorium. The council had mostly dispersed, but Sophia was still there, standing in the third row, looking up at the stage. When she saw him, her face lit up. You were incredible, she said as he approached. Iskander, that was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard. Better than La Traviata. Different, more personal. She climbed over the seats to reach him, taking his hands. You did it. You won. We won. he corrected. I couldn't have done this without you. What happens now? Now? He pulled her close. Now we figure out what comes next. Together. I'd like that. She hesitated. But Iskander, I'm still human. I'm still going to age and die. How do we make this work long term? One day at a time, he said. I have centuries to figure out the details. For now, I just want to be with you. Even though I'm temporary? Especially because you're temporary. Every moment with you is precious because I know it won't last forever. That makes it matter more, not less. Tears shone in her eyes again. She cried so easily, so beautifully. I love you. I love you too. He glanced at the empty stage, the dark auditorium. Wait here. He left her standing in the aisle and made his way back up to the stage. The orchestra had packed up and left, but the piano was still there, sitting in the wings. Iskander dragged it out to center stage, then returned to collect Sophia. What are you doing? She asked as he led her up the stage stairs. Giving you something I should have given you weeks ago. He sat at the piano, gestured for her to stand beside him. When I first saw you, you were looking at this stage like it held every dream you'd ever had. I wanted to give you those dreams. I started with the opera, but that was you watching. This is different. He began to play, a soft melody he'd composed years ago but never shared. Then he sang, just for her, his voice gentle in the empty theater, not performing, not proving anything, just sharing. Sophia listened with her hand on his shoulder, and when the song ended, she bent down and kissed the top of his head. Thank you, she whispered, for all of it, for seeing me, for this. Thank you for saving me, in every way that matters. They stayed there on the empty stage long after they should have left. Iskander played and sang, working through pieces he'd forgotten he knew, while Sophia listened and sometimes sang along quietly. The opera house embraced them, this space that had brought them together, that had witnessed both of them at their most vulnerable. Eventually, as dawn approached and Iskander needed to return to the shelter of his home, they made their way out. But at the door, Sophia paused. Can I ask you something? Of course. That first night when you bought the tickets, you said you wanted my first time to be perfect. Did you mean just the opera or something more? He thought about it, about all the firsts he'd wanted to give her. I meant everything. Your first opera, yes, but also your first time being seen the way you deserved. Your first time experiencing beauty from the best seat in the house instead of from behind a mop. Your first time knowing that someone saw you looking at that stage and wanted to give you the world. You've given me more than that, she said softly. You've given me a reason to believe in magic again. You gave me a reason to sing. They walked out into the pre-dawn darkness together, and Iskander felt something settle in his chest, peace, maybe, or purpose. The fading would always be there, a reminder of how close he'd come to losing everything. But it didn't frighten him anymore. He had Sophia, and she had him, and together they would figure out how to make forever work in whatever time they had. 6 months later, Sophia moved into Iskander's mansion. She kept her job at the opera house. I'm not giving up on my dreams just because I'm dating their biggest patron, she'd said firmly. But her nights were spent with him in the strange, beautiful world of vampire politics and ancient traditions. The council accepted her presence, though not without grumbling. A human consort for the vampire king was unusual, but not unheard of. What was unusual was how happy it made him, how the territories stabilized under his renewed leadership. Iskander's voice remained strong, the fading held at bay by the life he'd built with Sophia. She attended council meetings when she wanted to, offering perspectives that often surprised the ancient vampires. She made friends with Lucian, charmed Vivian, and even won over Severin eventually. She brought light into the underground court, and the vampires, though they'd never admit it, were better for it. But the question of her mortality hung between them, unspoken but present. Iskander refused to turn her into a vampire without her consent, and Sophia hadn't asked. The topic was there, waiting as the months turned into a year, then 2. Finally, on the anniversary of that first opera performance, Sophia brought it up. They were in the mansion's music room, Iskander at the piano while Sophia curled up on the nearby sofa. He was working through a new composition, something he'd started writing for her. "Iskander," she said during a pause in the music, "we need to talk about the future." He turned to face her. "What about it?" "I'm 26 now. In vampire terms, I'm basically an infant, but in human terms, I'm getting older, and I need to know what's your plan." "For us?" "My plan is to love you for as long as you'll let me." "That's not what I mean." She sat up. "Do you want me to become a vampire, or are you going to watch me age and die?" The question he'd been avoiding. "I want whatever you want." "That's not an answer." "Sophia." He moved to sit beside her. "Becoming a vampire is not a decision to make lightly. It's forever, truly forever. You'd lose the sun, the ability to have children, the option to age and die naturally. I won't ask you to give that up for me. But if I wanted to, then we'd discuss it, seriously. But I need you to be sure." She took his hand. "I've been thinking about it for months, and I think I want it. Not now, maybe, but eventually. Because the thought of leaving you, of you being alone again, I can't stand it. I've been alone before. I'd survive. But you shouldn't have to." She squeezed his hand. "You make me happy, happier than I ever thought I could be. And I want to spend as much time with you as possible. If that means becoming a vampire, then I'm willing to consider it." "Consider it carefully," he said, "because there's no going back." "I know. And I'm not saying yes right now. I'm saying ask me again in a few years, when I'm 30 maybe. Give me time to be human a little longer, to make sure this is what I really want." Relief flooded through him. Not an immediate decision, but not a no either. Time to figure it out together. "I can do that." "Good." She leaned against him. "Now play me that new piece you've been working on." He returned to the piano, and she listened with the same rapt attention she'd given La Traviata all those years ago. Outside, the city moved through its rhythms, but in this room, time felt suspended, just the music and the two of them, and the promise of years still to come. 4 years later, on Sophia's 30th birthday, Iskander took her back to the opera house after hours. He'd arranged it the same way he'd arranged that private performance, the building empty, the stage theirs alone. "Why are we here?" Sophia asked as they made their way down to the orchestra seats. "Because this is where it started," Iskander said, "and I thought it was fitting for what comes next." He led her onto the stage, to the same spot where he'd sung for the council, where he'd played piano for her that first time. From his pocket he drew a small box. Sophia's eyes widened. "Iskander." "Let me ask properly." He opened the box, revealing a ring set with a deep red stone. "Sophia Zimmerman, you've spent the past 4 years making me happier than I have any right to be. You've saved my life, my voice, my kingdom. You've given me a reason to sing again. And I know I'm asking you to give up the sun and a normal life, and so many human things. But I'm hoping you'll say yes anyway, because I love you more than I've loved anything in 8 centuries, and I want to spend forever with you. Will you marry me? Will you let me turn you when you're ready, so we can have that forever together?" Tears were already streaming down her face. Yes, God, yes, to all of it. He slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into a kiss that tasted like salt and joy. When they pulled apart, she was laughing. "We're getting married," she said, disbelieving. "I'm marrying the vampire king." "You're marrying me," he corrected. "The rest is just details." "Important details. Your council's going to lose their minds. Let them. You're worth any amount of political chaos." She kissed him again, and he lifted her, spinning her around on the empty stage while she laughed. When he set her down, she looked around the theater. "I still can't believe this is my life. 4 years ago, I was just the cleaning woman, and now I'm here, engaged to you, about to become immortal. Do you regret it?" "Not even a little bit." She touched his face. "You gave me my dreams, Iskander, all of them. You saw me when no one else did, and you made me feel like I mattered. How could I regret that?" "You've always mattered. I just made sure you knew it." They were married 3 months later in a private ceremony in the vampire court, with both vampire and human guests. Sophia wore a white dress that made her look like something from a fairy tale, and Iskander couldn't take his eyes off her. Lucian served as best man, grinning throughout the entire ceremony. Even the council members who'd opposed their relationship seemed happy, caught up in the celebration. The reception lasted until dawn, a strange, beautiful mix of vampire tradition and human joy. Iskander sang for Sophia, a piece he'd composed specifically for the occasion, and there wasn't a dry eye in the room, vampire or human. At the end of the night, as the sun threatened the horizon and the vampires retreated to the underground chambers, Sophia pulled Iskander aside. "I want to do it tonight," she said, "the turning." "Are you certain we can wait?" "I'm certain. I don't want to wait anymore. I want to start our forever now." So they went to his chambers, deep beneath the city where the sun couldn't reach. Lucian was there to help with the process, along with Vivian, who'd performed hundreds of turnings over her long life. "It will hurt," Vivian warned Sophia. "Not at first, but as the change takes hold. Are you prepared for that?" "I am." Iskander held her hand. "I'll be here the entire time. I won't leave you." "I know." Sophia lay back on the bed they'd prepared. "I trust you." He bent over her, letting his fangs extend. "I love you." "I love you too. Now do it before I lose my nerve." The turning was both intimate and clinical. Iskander drank from her wrist, carefully measured amounts while Vivian monitored her vitals. When enough blood had been taken, he opened his own wrist and held it to Sophia's lips. "Drink," he said softly. She did, hesitant at first and then more eagerly as the vampire blood took effect. The change began almost immediately, her heartbeat slowing, her skin paling, her breathing growing shallow. Iskander held her through it, whispering reassurance as her body transformed. It took 6 hours, 6 hours of pain and change and transformation. But finally, as the midday sun blazed overhead in the world they'd left behind, Sophia opened her eyes. They were the same warm brown, but with a new depth, a new awareness. She looked at Iskander, and he saw recognition there, not just of him, but of what she'd become. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Different, stronger, like I can hear everything, see everything." She sat up slowly, testing her new body. "And hungry. Is that normal?" Vivian laughed. "Very normal. We'll get you fed. But first look at yourself." She guided Sophia to a mirror. Sophia stared at her reflection, the white hair that had replaced her dark brown, the pale skin, the subtle changes in her features that made her look timeless, ageless. "I'm beautiful," she whispered. "You were always beautiful," Iskander said. "Now you're just immortal too." She turned to him with a smile that showed her new fangs. "So this is forever." "This is forever." She kissed him, and it was different now. 2 vampires instead of vampire and human. Equal, eternal, matched. The months that followed were an adjustment. Sophia had to learn to feed, to navigate vampire politics as one of them rather than as Iskander's human consort. She had to get used to the strength, the speed, the enhanced senses. She mourned the sun, though she'd known it was coming, and Iskander held her through those early nights when the weight of forever felt too heavy. But she adapted, the way she'd adapted to everything else in her life. She took her place at Iskander's side not as decoration or accessory, but as a partner in ruling the territories. The council members who doubted her learned quickly that she was formidable in her own right, smart, strategic, unafraid to challenge them. And through it all, Iskander sang. For her, for the court, for the joy of it. His voice remained strong, the fading nothing but a distant memory. He performed occasionally at the opera house, always anonymously, always for the love of the music rather than fame. 10 years after their wedding, they stood together in the opera house after hours. It had become a tradition, coming here on their anniversary, claiming the stage for themselves. "Do you ever miss it?" Iskander asked. "Being human?" Sophia considered. "Sometimes. I miss the sun. I miss coffee and food and some of the simple things, but I don't miss the loneliness, and I don't regret this." "Good. Because you're stuck with me now," she laughed. "Stuck with you? I think you mean blessed with you?" "That too." He sat at the piano, the same one he'd played that first night. "What should I play for you tonight?" "Something new, something you've never sung before." He thought for a moment, then began a melody that had been forming in his head for weeks. A song about finding home in another person, about second chances and unexpected love. As he sang, Sophia moved to stand beside the piano, her hand on his shoulder, listening with the same rapt attention she'd given every performance. When he finished, she bent down and kissed him. That was beautiful. What are you going to call it? Sophia's song, he said without hesitation. What else? You're impossible. You love me anyway. I really do. They stayed there on the stage, talking and laughing and occasionally singing together. Sophia's voice had developed into a lovely soprano, much to her delight. Outside, the city continued its endless motion, but in here, time felt suspended. Just the two of them and the music and the promise of forever stretching out ahead. Iskander looked at his wife, his partner, his reason for singing, and felt a peace he'd never thought possible. The fading was gone, defeated not by magic or medicine, but by love, by her. Thank you, he said softly. For what? For looking at that stage, for letting me take you to the opera, for giving me a reason to remember why all of this matters. You gave me everything, Sophia said, a life I never dreamed I could have. Purpose, love, forever. I should be thanking you. Then we're even. Not even close, but we have eternity to figure it out. Iskander pulled her onto his lap, and she curled against him, fitting perfectly the way she always had. The opera house stood silent around them, this place that had witnessed their beginning and would witness countless moments yet to come. I love you, he said. I love you too. Now play me something else. We have all night. So he did. He played and sang while she listened, and the hours passed unmarked, irrelevant. They had forever, after all. Forever to make music, to rule together, to love each other in this strange, beautiful life they'd built. The Vampire King had found his queen, not through power or politics, but through a simple act of kindness, buying opera tickets for a girl who'd never been. And in giving her that perfect first time, he'd found his own salvation, his own forever. The music filled the empty theater, and they were home.